excerpts of my faith journey over the years and some things that the Lord has pointed me to from the past. So let's get started. All right. So my name is Brenda Savanhu. I'm Zimbabwean. I wanted to share this picture because you see me and you see who I am. So you might as well see who I was when I was a child. And I actually found this picture in my mother's Bible. My mother passed away in 2012, and it was her bookmark, her Bible mark. So, and then this picture also reminds me that I'm a child of God. That was an area in which I had a lot of difficulty for some years and understand and just grasping that I was a child of God. I am an author of this book that we're talking about today, vision strategist and founder of Inspired Consulting. So I help people with vision strategy and also hospitality businesses with their strategy as well. And I am also a co-host of Habits and Stones. Habits and Stones is a podcast that Wendy Wall, a lot of you know who Wendy Wall is, Wendy Wall and I are doing together. So those are the things that I do. All right, so memorial stones. We're going to talk about memorial stones today. What are memorial stones? Memorial Stones is a guided devotional journal of foundational miracles in your life. And so the Lord gave me this idea, and he gave me specifically on how to do it. So that's what we're going to get into today. And then we'll read a little bit of an excerpt at the end. So you know how when God calls you on a journey, like all of us are believers in here, right? So God says, hey, Natasha, let's go on a journey. What do you say? Natasha's chewing. You say thumbs up. But you know how when God calls you on a journey, initially you're excited. Are you excited initially when that happens, right? You're like, oh my gosh, God has asked me to do this. So you're like, yeah, let's do it, God. But then you get on the journey and things start getting challenging. So that's what we're going to talk about. So that's the place of transition. There's the place of calling, and then there's the place of destination. But in between is the place of transition. And what happens within that transition, a lot of times it's mired with difficulties, right? It's obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, right? And then we end up asking ourselves, when was the last time God showed up? When was the last time he did something for me? When we just get mired in that place of difficulty. And so the inspiration of memorial stones, does everyone know the story of memorial stones in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, right? The concept of it, right? The Israelites had been in the wilderness for 40 years, and Moses had died. Leadership had been given over to Joshua by the Lord. And the Lord gives Joshua instructions. And so after the Lord gives Joshua instructions, Joshua goes and talks to the Israelites and says, by this you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will assuredly drive out from you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. So all of the ites. And so if you remember back in Numbers, what Joshua is saying is what the Lord promised the Israelites when they exited Egypt. So we go back to Numbers 23, 28 through 30. The Lord tells the Israelites, he's giving them all these promises as they've exited Egypt. He says to them, I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from you. I will not drive them out from you in a single year, so that the land will not become desolate and the animals of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out from you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. So to me, part of little by little, that's the transition, right? So the Lord says, Gia, I'm going to give you this territory, but you can't have it all at once. You can only have it bit by bit. And in that bit by bit, there is challenge, and then 4 steps back and another challenge. And so this devotional is all about that. It's like, how do we navigate those difficult places? For me, I have found that in church, I didn't get a lot of teaching on that. how to navigate the difficult places. It was like you're saved and everything is great. But that's not the truth of the matter. Like we are in the world, but not of the world. And Jesus himself promises us that we will have trouble. So that's the place of transition. And so then we get to the River Jordan. The Israelites are at the River Jordan. They need to cross. The Lord has given Joshua instructions about what that looks like. And one of the instructions was when they crossed the Jordan, God stopped up the Jordan for the Israelites so that they could cross on dry ground. The Levites had to go into the Jordan first. They set foot into the Jordan, and then the water stopped. So the Lord told them that they needed to take the stones out. So Joshua 4, verses 6-7. This shall be a sign among you when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become memorial stones to the sons of Israel forever. So as the Levites stood in the middle of the Jordan and the water was stopped up, the Israelites had crossed over to the other side. Then one man from each tribe had to go into the Jordan and pick up the stone. And those stones were to be set up on the other side as memorial stones. And those memorial stones were to remind the Israelites of the miracles God did, how he got them out of Egypt and how they survived through the promised land. And what's interesting, if we go back here, where Joshua is talking about this, it's 40 years after this promise. Has anyone waited 40 years for a promise? It feels like 40 years, but it's 40 years after the promise that Joshua says this. So it's just, when you think about that in context, it's like, do we give up on the promise or do we keep contending? So the inspiration for memorial stones, that was a basic inspiration for it. And I loved the idea of memorial stones. And I would talk to God about it. I'd say, I love this idea about memorial stones. I would love to do something around this. So one night, God wakes me up in the middle of the night. He does that a lot. One night he woke me up at like, I don't know, midnight. And he said, here is how you're going to do this. And I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? He said, take the story of Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. And you're going to take the names of the tribes of Israel, the names of the sons of Jacob, and create more memorial stones based on the meanings of those names. So seek in your life, seek miracles that I've done in your life based on the meanings of those stones. And those would be the foundational miracles. So he gave me that idea. It literally was 15 minutes and then I was back in bed. So, I mean, all that to say, this has been truly inspired by the Lord. And so that's where we start with memorial stones. There are 14 memorial stones. It's the 12 sons of Jacob. But why are there 14? Because Jacob took Joseph's sons. He took Manasseh and he took Ephraim. So there's going to be 14 memorial stones in this particular journey. Now, a lot of devotionals are day by day. I say for this one, do it however you're led. Because when I was going through this myself, there were times I had to just sit with a stone and ask the Lord, what do you want here? Some of those places were painful. And so I had to sit and allow for healing to happen. So I would say, don't rush through it. Just do it as the Lord is leading. So that is the inspiration of memorial stones. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where my journey started with memorial stones. I knew the story of Joshua and the Israelites, but I hadn't thought of the concept of creating memorial stones in my own life. And then, the Lord gave me that idea, right? And that was in August of 2022. But then I sat down and I was like, but when did this really start for me? It started when I wasn't able to put language to it. It started in 2006. In 2006, I was 6 years married and my marriage was falling apart. And I was kind of flailing, like, what's going on here? So we were heading towards divorce. And during that time, I started reading this book called Lies at the Altar, The Truth About Great Marriages by Dr. Robin L. Smith. And as I read that book, I realized how much of myself I had given up, how much of my identity I had given up, even the foundation of my faith I'd given up to be in this marriage, to be a good wife. I wanted to be a good wife. Anybody want to be a good wife? I wanted to be a good wife. And so I was like, man, I just gave up so much, but I wanted to be a good wife in my own strength rather than in the Lord's leading. Right. And so as I was doing all of these things, it just became a mess in my life. And then that was the time that the Lord he told me, take some time to reflect on this. And this was when I started repairing my relationship with the Lord. I recommitted my life with the Lord. And he said to me, haven't I always been in your life? And I was like, yeah, you have. And so then he took me on a journey of remembrance. But one of the places I went back to was my teenage years. My mom was strong in the faith. And so that's mom. And so when I was in that place, I got to a place to where I needed to recall my faith of old. So I called my best friend from college, from high school, and I was like, dude, like, I don't know what happened to me. And then I had another good friend, and she was just guiding me and helping me. And she's like, get the study Bible, do this, do that. And so I was reigniting my faith with the Lord. And then he reminded me of the miracles he did and the miracles that I saw that I forgot about. One of the miracles that I'll share has to do with my mother. So when I'm Zimbabwean, naturalized American. And when I was 16, an opportunity came up to become a Rotary Exchange student. And my mom was a single mom. She was divorced. We lived paycheck to paycheck. And I went home after school and I said, I was joking with my mom. I was like, guess what? They have these Rotary Exchange applications. And then she looked at me across the dinner table and she's like, why didn't you get one? And I was like, you can't afford it. We can't do this. And she said, come back with that application tomorrow. So I did. I went back to school, came back with the application. I applied to become a Rotary Exchange student, got in. The Lord provided the money miraculously. That's a story for another day. But the story I want to tell you is this. When I came to America as a Rotary Exchange student, my mother gave me a mission. She said, you are going to go there. You are going to apply for school. You're going to get into school and you're going to come back with an acceptance letter. And you're going to go back to America and go to school. So I said, okay, yes, ma'am. That's all you say to a Zimbabwean mother is yes, ma'am. So I came to America, took my ACTs, I checked out colleges, I applied, I got in, I went back home with my acceptance letter. Here you go, mom. I've done my part. She's still earning about the same amount, still living paycheck to paycheck. I didn't know how this was going to happen. I just knew that I did my part. And so my uncle comes to visit one day. He's talking to my mother. Her name's Irene. And he's like, Irene, there's this opportunity for these scholarships. I think you should go check it out. We lived in Bulawayo, which is the second largest city in Zimbabwe. And the place where this was happening was in Harare, which is the capital city. It was about 8 hours from our house. Mom didn't have a vehicle anymore. We were living paycheck to paycheck. We were on public transportation. But there was a train that would go from Bulawayo to Harare and vice versa every day. It was an 8-hour ride. So she made plans. She got off work one evening, went straight to the train station, got on the train, spent the night on the train, got to Harare the next morning, went from the train to the offices of where these scholarships were being dispersed. She got there. She didn't have an appointment. She's just like, she's going by faith. She gets there, she's sitting in the reception area, and she requests to speak to the issuing officer. The receptionist is horrible to her and says, no, she doesn't have time for you. And my mom's like, that's okay, I'll wait. So she sat in the reception area and she sat and she sat and she sat and she sat. 8 hours later, the woman had been going in and out of the office. She comes up to my mother and says, ma'am, you've been sitting here all day. Are you waiting to see me? And she said, yes. And she said, come into my office. So the woman ushered my mother into the office and they sat down. And my mother thought they were going to talk about scholarships. But instead, this woman started talking about the demise of her marriage and the things that were going on in her marriage. And mom, being a prayer warrior, much like Shara and Natasha, started praying for the woman. After she was done praying for the woman, the lady takes a letter, signs it, and says, your daughter has the scholarship. It was $80,000. It was a full ride scholarship for the 4 years of the school that I was going to. So I sat down and I said, wow. So then as an adult, I calculated that. She was 8 hours in the train overnight. She was 8 hours sitting in that office. It was 16 hours. In those 16 hours, she made $5,000 an hour. She made 5,000, but not because of anything that she did. It was because of her faith. It was because of how God led her. And I was like, wow, only God. And so I was rebuking myself, like, Brenda, how could you forget these things? Like, and that's just one of the miracles. If you sit down with me, I can tell you many miracles that happened in my childhood. But that was just one of the miracles. And I was like, wow, how did I forget this? That's a memorial stone. That's something significant. That marked my faith with the Lord. And so, I came to college and my mother gave me $236 and my tuition was paid. So I remember I came to school and then I ran out of my $236. I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, I'm out of money. And she's like, honey, you're on your own. And she hung up the phone. And so I looked at my roommate. I was like, oh my God, my mom's not going to send me money. And my roommate was like, put on some interview clothes, go to the admissions office and get yourself a job. And so all that to say, all my mother paid for me to go to college was my airline ticket. Actually, there's a story about the airline ticket. She didn't pay for the airline ticket. God provided for that. She gave me $236. $36. That was it. That was it. And so I was like, wow, memorial stones, it matters. It matters what God has done because it then fuels our vision for the future and it helps us navigate. And so, what I would love to do, if you guys don't mind, is I would like to read to you one of my memorial stones about my journey to Houston and the things that happened there. But that was a place at which I had to remember the memorial stones. I had to remember what God had done to be able to walk through that challenge. So if you're on Zoom, in the chat, I put a link to some handouts. And then in the room, Antonella is going to be my helper. She didn't know. Welcome. She is going to hand out. So you don't have to look at those right now. And what I'm going to do is just read to you Memorial Stone number 4, what the Lord did with me there. I feel like I know Antonella. I've prayed for her so many times. Well, there we go. So as I mentioned before, there are 14 memorial stones, and I'm going to read memorial stone number 4, which is Dan, Jacob's son Dan, or the tribe of Dan. And the meaning of that name is God has vindicated me. And so as I tell you the story about my journey to Houston, it's a story of vindication, of how God brought me here. And it's another story of God said to me, Brenda, come with me on a journey. And I was like, yes, Lord, yes. And then I just started running into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. Shara and I talk about this sometimes is we sometimes sing these worship songs and we don't realize that we're actually praying and we're praying very difficult prayers. There was a song that at the church I went to a church called Chicago Tabernacle when I lived in Chicago. And they were birthed out of Brooklyn Tabernacle, if you've heard of that church. And the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir, right? They produced so many albums, but one of the songs I would sing with my arms flung into the sky and my head back was called I'll Say Yes, Lord. And it would go, I'll say yes, Lord. I'll say yes to your will, Lord. I'll say yes. Where you lead me, I will go. I'll say yes, Lord. I'll say yes. I didn't know what I was saying. What was I saying yes to? What was I saying yes to? I mean, I was saying yes to God, but I didn't know I was saying yes to some of the challenges that I would have to walk through in my life. And so I'm going to read this. So lean back, relax, and I will read this to you. So this is Memorial Stone number 4 out of my devotional. Dan, God has vindicated me. Leah gave birth to 3 healthy boys, which in biblical times was a tremendous accomplishment. In those days, giving birth to a male meant greater power and glory for the tribe. Rachel, however, suffered from a closed womb, and her jealousy of her sister consumed her. In her desperation, she decided to give her maid Bilhah to Jacob to hopefully conceive a surrogate son. And so I'm going to read Genesis 30, verses 1 through 6. Now, when Rachel saw that she had not borne Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I'm going to die." A bit dramatic, right? Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my female slave Bilhah. Have relations with her, that she may give birth on my knees, so that by her I too may obtain a child." So she gave him her slave Bilhah as a wife. Jacob had relations with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me and has indeed heard my voice. He has given me a son." Therefore, she named him Dan. In January of 2015, I started the year feeling restless. Not in a bad way, but the kind of restlessness you feel in anticipation of a new season. Looking back on my sporadic journaling, part of an entry on January 25th, 2015 reads, "You have a divine purpose for me, a calling upon my life. So here I am, Lord. Send me." Had I known what that sending would look like, I'm not sure I would have prayed that prayer. Soon after, I was asked by my boss if I would be interested in transferring to a new city under a new team he would be leading to open a new property. I took that inquiry to my prayer closet and felt the peace to proceed with a yes. When I returned to my boss with the answer, knowing I had his support, I knew this transfer process would be a shoe-in. How wrong I was. Initially, I received a tentative yes. The yes came with conditional stipulations, ensuring I continued to do a good job, which I knew wouldn't be an issue because I was a good worker. My boss soon left for the new city to get things started. Someone else replaced him, who quickly told me on their third day on the property that I was doing a terrible job and would not be transferring. I responded immediately by presenting evidence to the contrary, but as you can imagine, our relationship got off on the wrong foot. Despite the evidence, the decision remained that I would not go. Several weeks later, I was told it was a go again. I could transfer, but first, I had to meet with the regional vice president to get my final yes. I would meet with him during his scheduled property visit. On the day and time I was to meet with him, I was diverted to by my new boss, who sat me down and told me that the meeting would not be happening. Therefore, I would not be transferring. I was livid. I felt like a tennis ball being volleyed continuously over the net. Our exchange was less than cordial, and I was feeling dejected. One thing I knew for sure after that meeting was that I needed guidance. I had to attend my church's weekly Tuesday night prayer service. God answered my prayer for guidance using 2 Chronicles 20, verse 15. And he said, "Listen, all of you, Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. This is what the Lord says to you. Do not fear or be dismayed of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." At that moment, I gave up fighting. I still wasn't happy, but I knew that the battle was not mine. By now, we were at the end of March, so it had been a little over 2 months. What I thought would be a simple process turned out to be one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. I still felt the restlessness from January and kept asking the Lord where I needed to go because I knew my time was up there. The conversation came up again. Once again, it was a possibility that I would go. Honestly, by this time, I was tired of drinking the Kool-Aid, and I really did not believe it. But I knew that God could do the impossible. So I brought the prayer back up to him again. It was Tuesday after Memorial Day 2015, and I was off to the Tuesday night prayer meeting. As I made my way to church that evening, I was wrestling with being emotionally and mentally tired of the last 5 months regarding my transfer. That evening, the message was based on Revelation 3, verses 7 through 8. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, He who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens, says this: I know your deeds. Behold, I put before you an open door, which no one can shut, because you have a little power and have followed my word and not denied my name. My pastor said, because you're weak doesn't mean that God cannot break open the door. There was an altar call, and I couldn't make it up there fast enough. With everything in me, I cried out to the Lord, please either open the door or close it, because I'm tired. My friend Shelley made her way to me and prayed for me. I don't recall what she prayed, but I felt it in the depths of my soul. I was summoned to the general manager's office on Thursday of that week. I didn't know why I was called to his office, nor did I speculate. He asked me to sit down, looked at me, and said, You're going to Houston. I responded with a blank stare. He asked me what I thought, and I told him, You have been yanking me around, so forgive me if I don't believe you. And then he gave me a signed letter with the transfer approval. I looked at it to confirm, and then I allowed myself a smile. As I exited his office with the letter securely in my hand, I gave God praise. After 5 months of battle, the Lord had vindicated me. And so I've given you a handout with some questions, so we can take a couple minutes, maybe just do the first 2 questions, and you can take the rest to do at home. Recall a time you received an answer to prayer as vindication from the Lord. And you don't have to answer, I just want you to sit and think. And question 2 is, what was happening in your life at that time? What was the Lord vindicating you from? And then question 3 is, what was this blessing the Lord gave you that you received as vindication, and why did you receive it as vindication? So I'd invite you to take the handouts home and you can think about that, of a place of vindication, a place from which the Lord vindicated you. And if you're in a place of battle right now, similar to what I just read, or a place where it seems like you're volleying, going back and forth, remember that God is the God of vindication, and He is the one who fights for us. Thank you. All right. So we read that, and those are the questions that are on the spreadsheet for you. So I want to thank you for coming. If you're not on my wait list yet for the devotional, if you'd like to get on the wait list, you can scan that QR code. It's also on your handout. And then for a sneak peek of Habits and Stones, we'll have an episode launching on Monday. If you're interested in that, go ahead and scan that QR code where it says Habits and Stones and subscribe and hit your notification bell. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know yet. We're in the cover design stage, so they haven't given me a date yet. But as soon as I have the date, if you sign up for the wait list, I'll be announcing there first through the wait list. Thank you. Thank you.